It's Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, November 8th, 2024. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Boise, Idaho, I am John Ramey. Another incumbent party has lost electoral ground, and this time it's the United States. Vice President Kamala Harris, the incumbent vice president to President Joe Biden, has lost the election to former and future President Donald Trump. He will become the second U.S. president after Grover Cleveland to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. Somebody somewhere said, shout out to Grover Cleveland, who is no longer a bar trivia question answer. So,
well, he might be. I mean,
right,
the question will be different, right? I mean,
right?
Who was the first
United
States president?
So non-consecutive terms for Donald Trump. This has been kind of the great black hole at the center of our electoral galaxy here in 2024. Electorama, half the planet was voting this year, right?
Yes. And actually, I think that gives us a good perspective on this. And John, you very astutely led off this discussion with noting that this was yet another incumbent party losing power.
I've got a whale of a stat for you on that. May I offer it?
Please go right ahead. I'm really anxious to hear this.
John Byrne Murdoch of the Financial Times reports that for the first time since 1905, or rather records of this sort of thing began in 1905, every governing party sitting for election on Earth has lost vote share.
Yes, and I think that's the actual story here. And we have, I think, a very good perspective on this just because we've been covering Electorama 2024 all year. And I don't even remember how many elections we've discussed. It's probably a good dozen by now.
I would say 15 would be, yeah.
Okay. And this is certainly
more than 10.
This is certainly the most consequential of them, as we've been sort of hinting at, if not stating outright, all year long. And so here in our own country, we're hearing a lot of people right now saying, this is a massive political realignment and stuff like this. And it might be, right? I don't want to dismiss that idea. But as I mentioned in previewing this last week, we're not going to get a full comprehensive data set on how this election went until about the beginning of the year. And so
I'm so glad you pointed that out, because of course the media frenzy to explain this is at a fevered pitch.
Yes, and it's doing us a disservice as a populace.
And we all instinctively want to make sense of it. So we're especially vulnerable to this kind of thing right now.
I understand this, but there are also people who don't actually want to make sense of it and instead want to, well, they might have a couple different motivations. On the right, that is in the Republican Party, it's just pure triumphalism. Right? It's like we crushed the Democrats. They've got nothing. They're losers, blah, blah, blah. In the Democratic Party, it's jockeying for control of the party going forward. So you've got the moderates pointing fingers at the progressives and vice versa. And this is all premature. And I would especially say, as someone who votes from the left myself, people in the Democratic Party are doing the party a disservice with this sort of rhetoric, because they don't actually know. For instance, all the data that we have so far is based on exit polls. And exit poll data is notoriously unreliable and always has to be adjusted later on when the full data set is published from the United States Census Bureau. And so we're seeing a lot of figures being thrown around, so many of which are just almost grotesquely misleading. I'll give you one example, is that people will tell you that Trump boosted his share with young voters. That is, people under the age of whatever, arbitrary age limit people put on this category, right? Up to 49 or whatever it might happen to be, right? And that's true. He got a higher share of young voters than he did in 2020. However, the total number of young voters actually fell. And so Trump got a larger share of a smaller pie. Is that more voters? We don't know. It might be, but we shouldn't assume that it is. And so people throwing these figures around are being, I would say, very irresponsible. Having said that, one piece of hard data that we do have is that the total number of votes fell.
Yeah, and 14 million maybe?
Just 13 to 14 million.
Yeah.
That's the differential. And so we believe that once all the votes are counted, thanks to our laggard vote counting here in California, frankly, where it seems.
Hey, don't count out Nevada. Jackie Rosen hasn't quite won yet.
Okay, fine. But, that's going to be called pretty soon, whereas it'll probably take at least another week before we know what all the votes were here in California, where it seems as though all the vote counting is done by three stoners in some basement in Sacramento.
You don't know that it's not.
I don't know that it's not. That's exactly right. Okay, but now I've lost my train of thought. But
sorry.
That's all right. We believe, and I think this is going to work out, but Trump will get about the same number of votes as he got in 2020. And so his victory can be attributed to Democrats or people who generally vote Democrat just not showing up. And that, I think, is something that we're going to need to look at. The problem, though, is that exit polls, they're called that because they're polls of people who did vote. And as a matter of fact, the more comprehensive set of data that we're going to get from the Census Bureau at the beginning of the year will have that same problem. It will only be about people who did vote. So some demographers somewhere, and I'm confident that they will do this, but they're going to need to try and track down people who voted last time and didn't show up this time and ask them why they didn't. Having said that, people on the progressive side of the Democratic Party believe that Harris lost because she moved too far to the center. Now, I can't say whether that's true or not. It might be, and it might not be. But if Democrats are losing lots of, that is, reliably Democratic voters aren't showing up, it's at least a plausible scenario. Whereas nobody could say, I don't know anybody, nobody could say that Harris didn't move far enough to the center, right? That she didn't.
No, she ran right to the center.
Yeah. But again, it's too early to make these judgments, and therefore we ought not to be making them at all. John, you and I are.
Go ahead.
We're not going to end up controlling the Democratic Party, so we have no stake in this. But it's shameful for the people who do have a stake in it to be using this today, right? Let them all wait until the end of the year. They've got the holidays coming up. They've got things to do. They don't have to do this now. There'll be plenty of time to snipe at each other next year.
Sure, Sam. But cynically, there's media, there's clicks to be had. Now, I'll say maybe they should stop doing it at least until the counting is over, because as of Friday morning, the Washington Post reporting 2 Senate races, U.S. Senate races, remain uncalled in Nevada and Arizona. As we record this Friday evening, it's still true. Jackie Rosen leads Republican Sam Brown in Nevada, and Democratic Congressman Ruben Gallego leads Republican Kari Lake in Arizona for that Senate seat. If Rosen and Gallego, both Democrats, win, Republicans will have a majority with 53 seats in the U.S. Senate. 26 House races remain uncalled. Republicans need to win 7 of those to secure a majority. Democrats need to win 20. So there's still a shoot the moon opportunity for the Democrats to maintain or to gain control of the House.
Yes, although shooting the moon would really be more, that particular metaphor would be more for the Republicans. That would be getting all three.
Sure.
Right, that's really
the Democrats have a narrow path to controlling the House.
Have you ever played Hearts, John?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Now, regardless of any card game metaphors we might
see, it's that kind of condescension that's cost the Democratic Party.
That's exactly. It's my fault, right? It's my fault. I'm the reason Kamala lost. It's all on me, folks. But honestly, people seem to. As you say, there's an easier path for the Republicans to control the House than there is for the Democrats, and I think that's likely to work out. And if that happens, I think it's really interesting because, as you say, the Senate will be about 52, 53 seats for the Republicans. Right now, Trump has won less than 51% of the popular vote. Now, people who understand political demography better than I do seem to think he'll end up with somewhere in the area of 52 to 53. But it really looks like all three of the elected branches of government will be in the same area of margin, just over the majority. The problem, as we know, is that in our system, that gets you everything. If you control both houses of Congress and the presidency, you can do almost anything you want. And that's a big problem. For instance, Trump will almost certainly have the opportunity to cement the conservative majority on the Supreme Court and the other branch of government for generations to come. And that's going to be a big problem for reproductive rights, for presidential authority, and the regulatory regime. It's just going to be awful. There will be things.
The administrative state.
Yes, exactly. It's going to be very, very bad. And that's another reason why I just wish that Democrats would stop pointing their fingers at each other and start trying to figure out what to do to ameliorate or that is to mitigate the harm that they know is going to be done. That is what they should be trying to do as public servants, in my humble opinion.
All right. Well, that's enough political analysis on Working for Crusoe, because as you know, this is an economics and foreign affairs podcast. So I will offer up this gem also from the Post. Elon Musk joined a Wednesday call between President-elect Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, said 4 people familiar with the matter, in the latest sign that the tech billionaire intends to intertwine himself with Trump's governing apparatus. The call began with a conversation between Trump and Zelensky, who remarked how the call was possible because of Musk's Starlink internet service, which connected the two leaders while Zelensky was on a train to Budapest, said 2 people familiar with the conversation. Trump said Starlink had provided internet access to recent hurricane victims in the United States and noted that, hey, Leon Musk here is with me on the line. Sorry, Trump had taken to calling Elon Musk, perhaps inadvertently Leon Musk, and then put him on the call. The Ukrainian official went on to say it was very pleasant.
I'm sure it was.
Are we wasting our time because we recall this from the first Trump term, when matters of international affairs, diplomacy, just no protocol, no regard for protocol. I mean, are we wasting our breath if we jump up and down and say, see, this is wrong, this is a problem, it shouldn't
No,
be like
it always needs to be flagged, right?
Okay.
Every abuse needs to be cataloged, but it doesn't necessarily merit a great deal of discussion, right? Of course, this is awful. It fits right in with every pattern.
I mean, it's absurd.
And so, but yeah, we do need to know about it and make sure that we take note of it, just because history needs to know about these things. Not that they're going to be getting it from us, but
Sure.
It is something. It's just another. And if anything, people who voted for Trump need to know that this is what they voted for, and every single thing that he does needs to be added to the record just for that reason.
I wrote a piece on the Substack where we publish this podcast in addition to YouTube. And it was not very long, just a couple paragraphs. And essentially it was just it came after my discussion with my better half, who is, of course, a dual citizen, American and British. And she endured Brexit. Brexit happened in 2016, the same year Donald Trump was first elected to the U.S. presidency. And we were just talking about how, these democratic results shook our sense of national identity, individual national identity, to the core. And so then I wrote this piece, which it's obviously it's not paywalled, it's on my Substack, but it's 3 times in the last 8 years, the United Kingdom, the United States, who I would say are the if unequal, co-guarantors of the post-war peace, have basically said, we don't want the gig anymore. We don't want to deal with you people, the rest of the world. We don't want you coming here, the rest of the world. we're taking our ball and we're going home. And I wrote that in the piece. And with these now three tectonic events electorally in the two countries, I think, I mean, I had held out hope, as we've discussed on this podcast, that the United States would right itself,
as did I,
and stay the leader of the free world. And that's over. There is another article in the Washington Post quoting several senior Russian officials saying the Cold War is over, we've won, and we're looking forward to setting up a power structure with us and China.
Yes, and Putin said a new world order. Now we've known for a while.
I'm sorry, eggs cost a lot in, Pennsylvania.
Okay,
I really am.
Now, let's back up a little bit. Okay. As
Pennsylvania, Nevada, sorry. My state voted for him too.
As we mentioned, incumbent parties all over the world have been taking it on the chin all year long. And there's a sub-narrative to that overall narrative, which says that inflation, among other issues, including immigration, but worldwide, inflation has defeated incumbent parties, often to the benefit of nationalist, populist, right-wing parties. And
is that only this year, or has that also happened in history?
Sure, it has happened in history, but we need to interrogate that because it's faulty. Okay. For instance, John, in all the elections that we've covered on this show all year long, which party in which country would you say has had the most commanding victory?
Labor?
It's obviously the British Labour Party. They just clobbered the Conservatives.
Right.
All right.
So you're saying this anti-incumbency trend knows no left or right.
That's right. The British Labour Party isn't a nationalist populist right-wing party. They're the traditional center-left party of Great Britain for a very long time. And so this is not about so much anyway. It's not so much about right or left. It's just incumbency. All right. So that's why when people are saying today, oh, Trump got reelected and this constitutes a massive political realignment in the United States, it could,
but we can't know that.
No, and it will if Trump leaves his second term with people thinking he'd done a good job, right? And I think there's a pretty good chance that he won't do a good job and people will understand that he didn't. But we have to do everything we can to make sure that this realization dawns on people. All right. And another great example is India, right? They were governed by a very popular prime minister, religious, nationalist, populist, right-wing party, right?
Modi is, it's kind of a MAGA figure.
Very.
Indian MAGA, whatever.
That's right. And they lost their parliamentary majority.
Right.
And commentators at the time who know more about India than we do said that people felt that prosperity in India was not being shared widely enough. Right.
Sounds familiar.
We can contrast this with Indonesia, where President Joko Widodo was able to, or Jokowi, as he's known, was able to anoint his handpicked successor because people in Indonesia generally did feel that prosperity in Indonesia was being widely shared. Indonesia was one of the rare exceptions to the overall pattern of 2024. In which the incumbent party was able to continue its rule. And so people need, and I think it's really just sort of not quite xenophobic, but kind of insular.
Myopic?
Where people in America, very much like Donald Trump, by the way, don't even care about anything that happens in other countries, and they don't care to look at these things. It's all just, it's about us, and it is. Okay, this was a real rightward shift, right? But if Trump didn't actually get any more votes this year than he did in 2020, why should we say that he's picking up support, right? If it's actually the exact same total. And so I think it's really important to keep this in mind. And as we've been discussing, I think the real issue here is inflation. And I think that if Harris and not so much Harris herself, but the party as a whole, including Joe Biden, and especially Joe Biden, in fact, who was never able to communicate adequately to the American people that he understood the hardship that inflation was inflicting upon them. And because I hold Joe Biden in very high regard, but he was not good at this. And I think this might have been an additional sort of liability brought upon him by his advanced age, and not just the total number of years he's lived, but the specific chronology of those years. Because when Joe Biden came into the Senate, it was really at that moment that inflation started to become a very large problem in this country, much worse than it has been in recent years. But Biden himself had just been elected to the Senate, so he was doing okay. But he remembered that, oh, well, this inflation we're having now, yeah, it's bad, but it's nothing compared to what it was like back in the 70s.
And I've heard commentators say this, right? But people my age don't know that.
That's exactly right.
And nobody younger than me knows that it was once worse.
Not just that, but to put it in even more specific terms, nobody in the workforce today was in the workforce at that time, or maybe they just entered it. All right. So they weren't participating in the economy as wage earners or
stakeholders
rent payers or mortgage holders or anything. They weren't fully adult participants in the economy. And so they have no reference by which to judge inflation. To them, it's this crazy, awful thing that they've never seen before. And Biden, just by virtue of the specific years in which he's lived, couldn't grasp that.
Right.
And that was a problem. And I think an additional problem, which we've already discussed in previous episodes, is that inflation is a much worse problem the further down the wealth table you are, right?
Sure.
And I think that's sort of a parabolic curve, right? It just it drops off very quickly, right? As you go down the wealth table, it's a bigger problem, like a snowball, right? And
that makes it all the more ironic that some people further down the wealth table, many people, we don't know if a majority, voted for a candidate who has won, Donald Trump, who his proposals economically are wildly inflationary.
Yes. And we're going to have to see how that works out. But you're absolutely right. Every single thing that Trump proposes to do, with the exception of drilling for more fossil fuels, is inflationary. Okay. Mass deportation, which seems to be his priority, right? He's been talking about that since the election, right? That's definitely inflationary.
Your vegetables, I don't mean to paint with a broad brush about the immigrant labor force, but your vegetables will become much more expensive if that happens.
Not just that, but I mean, these people work, right? They work in a lot. I mean, I heard a commentator named Paulo Ramos on television yesterday saying that the average undocumented immigrant in this country has been here for 16 years. Okay. Wow. They're not picking the vegetables. They're working at Walmart or, just having a job like anybody else.
Right.
Okay. And so it's just a shortage of labor that by itself is inflationary. It doesn't matter what the job happens to be. If you have fewer workers, that's inflationary. Period. End of story. Right. The tariffs, right? Also inflationary. But there's a problem here, right? There are almost certainly telephone calls being made and emails being sent right now from donors to Trump's campaign who are business owners and or executives, right? Saying, listen, I donated to your campaign. Who do I need to talk to? Please don't deport my employees, right? Please don't charge this tariff on this particular set of goods that I need to import for my business. Now, I don't know how Trump will react to this. I don't think anybody does, right? He might say, oh, well, you donated to my campaign? Well, guess what? That was my last campaign. But on a completely unrelated note, I do have this cryptocurrency business that I'm operating right now. Something like this could easily happen.
Sure.
Uh, and and so maybe uh, the tariffs aren't going to be as big as he's been saying they're going to be, because when has Donald Trump ever said he was going to do something and then not done it? Boy,
Right.
that never happens, right?
Right.
And so the same thing with the mass deportations, right? Just like if someone's from a large agricultural conglomerate is like, look, I'm a donor, please don't raid me, okay? And in fact, as we talked about in one of our previous episodes, Trump over the summer did a telephone interview with Joe Kernan on CNBC, which I think was a carefully chosen media outlet in which to do this, in which he said, look, the threat of tariffs are
Yes.
basically a negotiating tactic to bring other countries to the table. And I think at the time I thought, well, that's just weird. Why would you give away your
Admit it.
negotiating?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
But he's also, I think, because he knows who the CNBC audience is, right? He's saying, look, I don't intend to kneecap you, business owner who watches CNBC every day. I'm doing this for a reason. All right. And I do think that it will end up being a sort of patronage program. Therefore, the tariffs may not be as big as he says they're going to be, and therefore they may not be as inflationary. And I would say the same thing for the mass deportations,
Right.
right? And so if we're counting on Trump to jack up inflation, we might want to, I think, disabuse ourselves of that idea.
Well, listen, I'd be fine if some of the wilder policy proposals don't happen for any number of reasons. And yeah, I don't want inflation. Nobody does.
Nobody does. But the the point I'm making is that we shouldn't count on Trump to wildly mismanage the economy to the point where it damages him politically, which honestly, I've seen economic downturns. I've only seen one Donald Trump, right?
Right.
And I think he's actually worse. Uh, and so
What? Okay, go ahead.
No, you
Sorry.
go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say, so that's kind of the economic side of it. What about the foreign policy side of it?
Okay, well, there's one more thing about the economic side that I'd
Okay.
like to talk about before
Yeah,
we
please.
depart from it, which is that there was actually a really excellent article in the New Yorker the week before the election by Nicholas Lehman. And he outlined in quite a lot of detail the economic agenda that had been enacted by President Biden, basically the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. And both of those pieces of legislation were designed for the funding to roll out slowly over a period of years. And in fact, it's only begun to do so. So in fact, Trump will benefit from these programs as long as he doesn't kill them, which I think is just the easiest thing for him to do, is just to sit there and do nothing. He's going to come into office on January 20th. And as we know, the Fed is still cutting interest rates.
They did this week.
That's right. All the economic indicators, the top line, the headline numbers, which don't really reflect how bad people feel about inflation, but all the headline numbers are actually very good, except for a softening in the labor market, which could be a problem for him. But he's going to
he'll just deport millions of people, and that labor market will tighten.
That's right. Okay, and so he's going to come into office and say, "Look, I fixed the economy instantly." Right, and many of his supporters will believe him, and other people who voted for him because of inflation will say, at least prices have stopped going up, right? Because we know they're not going to come down.
Foreign policy. Trump, no fan of NATO, doesn't really understand why the United States would be engaged in the world in a multilateral sense. You and I talked about this on a phone call earlier this week. Ukraine, partitioned at best. Gaza,
over,
right?
Yeah, I think so. But now there are people who think that Trump might be so vain and so desirous of glory that he wants to be the guy to solve the biggest problem in the history of international diplomacy. I think that's an unreasonable hope, right? I don't think that he'll actually do
Listen,
that.
he has impressed me unexpectedly many times before, at least twice now,
How so? Or just by
by
winning?
winning the presidency
Okay,
twice.
well,
Yeah,
but I think that he'll probably just let Netanyahu do whatever he
do
wants
whatever
in
he
Gaza
wants.
and the West Bank and Lebanon, by the way, in
Right.
addition to Gaza. And I think it's just going to be awful, just awful. And the United States will have to wear that forever. I hope I'm wrong,
Right.
okay? But I really do think that's the way it's going to work out.
What about Taiwan?
I couldn't tell you, all right?
Yeah.
China's
China's
got
got their hands full
They kind of
economically.
do. Yeah. And for instance, we now know that North Korean soldiers are fighting in Russia against Ukrainian forces. We remember the incursion into Kursk, or the incursion back
If you
in
will.
where Ukraine actually crossed the border into Russian territory. And that so far, that's where the North Korean soldiers are fighting on Russia's behalf. They have not crossed into Ukraine. Uh, this is annoying to China, from what I gather, right? It's just like, look, we're friends with Russia, we're friends with North Korea. They're both kind of annoying, frankly, but we would prefer to just deal with them separately. We don't really want them both to be fighting a Western backed army in Europe. Thanks, just the same. Uh, and so,
You can feel for them.
yeah, and it's sort of like, the annoyed parent. It's just like, you kids, all right, you go over there and you go over there and just
Right.
stay there, okay? Uh, but, it's difficult to actually get that to happen. We'll see how that works out, but I don't have high hope for Ukraine, as you say, probably partition at best. And I mean, it's just awful. What happens to NATO? Difficult to say. The thing is, though, that Trump has uh, staked out the claim that uh, he won't protect NATO members if they don't raise their defense spending to I think it's 2% of
2% of
GDP,
GDP.
right? And most of them have done so by now.
Right.
And uh, as long as I think they can demonstrate that they're making progress towards there, if they're not there already, he might relent on that. But it's difficult to say, right? You
Would
can't
I have to give
actually,
him, would we have to give him credit for that if he got the NATO members to
to
actually
some
somehow
degree.
blustered his way into getting NATO
Well,
members to arm
I
themselves a little
mean,
bit?
I would say it's really more because of Putin, right?
Sure.
Uh,
Fair enough.
Putin really, made that a much more urgent priority for them, I would have to say.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
But
Putin
it's
plus Trump probably makes it pretty urgent
yes,
for
but
European
Taiwan,
NATO members.
I wouldn't hazard a guess in either direction.
Yeah.
Uh, the American intelligence believes that Xi Jinping has told the Chinese military to be ready to take Taiwan back by 2017. And as we recall, there,
2027.
I'm sorry, 2027. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can't remember what day it is. But
That's okay. That neither can I, Sam.
all right, that's a few years off. And there were some scandals in the defense procurement department of the Chinese government earlier this year, where with high level dismissals and really disappearances of people in charge of procurement. So China might want to just make sure that all their uh, military equipment works as advertised, which they don't know, right? Because they never have had to use it for anything like this, right? They're making a lot of noise. They're doing a lot of naval and air exercises around Taiwan, much more than they've ever done before. And so they are at least signaling that they're ready to do this. Whether they are or not, I wouldn't hazard a guess, frankly. But it's certainly a matter of concern. I don't think Trump would lift a finger to help Taiwan, frankly.
Right.
Now, it's possible that somebody might be able to prevail upon him to see the wisdom of
Defending Taiwan.
yeah. Again, he's too unpredictable for me to say whether I think that's true.
I mean, couldn't somebody say, look, Mr. President, a lot of our semiconductors are still made there. We have to have that.
That's right. But he has proposed lots of other ideas that we know will cripple this or that industry, right? He doesn't seem to care, right?
Right.
He seems to think that by doing that, he'll let that industry come back to the United States, right? And that's not really the way you want to go about that, right? For instance, we know that President Biden has been sort of instituting incentive programs to return manufacturing of different kinds to this country, and that has worked. And
Not electorally.
no, but it's you don't do it by just destroying the industry someplace else and waiting around for it to be built back up here, right? I mean, it just seems like a terrible idea, but that doesn't mean he won't do it.
Well, there will be no shortage of things for us to talk about. I mean, honestly, I'm very curious about how he staffs up the Defense Department and State Department. I mean, I think those will be huge. Domestically, the Attorney General, but that's not really the focus of this podcast.
No, that's not for us. Yeah. But there'll be plenty of other things to talk about even later this year. For example, the governing coalition government in Germany is about to collapse. They'll have snap elections either probably
no earlier than the 15th of January, right?
That's what
Scholz wants.
Yeah, the opposition party wants them next week. I kind of don't think that's going to happen, but there were going to be snap elections, and apparently they're a direct result of our election. I'm not exactly certain why that had to happen, but it might just be that Scholz thought that this would be the best time because people will be thinking about other things, right? And maybe he's just tired of his job. But so that we'll be talking about that next week. The Boeing strike has ended. That'll help with the jobs totals this month. But as we've been saying, unemployment has been creeping up. This could be an economic problem for us going forward. Finally, there's a large subcommittee meeting in China going on right now where they're determining how much more stimulus they want to add to the Chinese economy. So that'll be something to look out for. There was nothing at all on the Global Times website about this today, which I found interesting. But we'll see how that plays out.
All right. Ride the wave of the 21st century. He's Sam Park. I'm John Ramey. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.